Some doors should stay closed. Paranormal M, we open them anyway. Subscribe and join us in facing the unthinkable, the haunted girl with no name. I don't exactly believe in ghosts, not like the obsessed way some people talk about them at every sleepover. But this one incident, it's the kind of thing that sticks in your head and refuses to leave. I bring it up at every friend gathering, and they always lean in like it's the first time. I think I was in 7th grade when it happened. It was during our music period, or that class was held in a room on the top floor of our school building. And just to give a bit of context, grades 1 to 4 had their classrooms downstairs, grades 5 to 10 had their rooms upstairs. And anyway, we were walking up with our teacher when I realized I'd forgotten my sketchbook on my desk. Which was weird because I never leave it behind. Still, I mumbled to my friend that I'd be right back and jogged down to grab it. When I entered the empty classroom, it was quiet in that uncomfortable way only schoolrooms can be when no one's there. I walked to my desk, flipped open my bag, and then out of nowhere I heard the softest little voice behind me, and it said, "Hi." I nearly jumped out of my skin. There was a girl at the door, couldn't have been older than maybe 8, and wearing our school uniform, hair cut bluntly to her chin. She had this tiny, unsure smile, and I honestly don't remember her face clearly anymore. It's been years, but she was sweet-looking. She asked if I had any markers, and I never bring those. They're pretty pricey. But for some reason I had them that day. Don't ask me why. Fate or bad luck, who knows? I could have said no, but I didn't. I pulled the bag out and handed them to her. She walked over, said a quiet "thank you," and started backing away. Being the responsible 7th grader that I was, I asked for her name and class so I could find her later. She tilted her head like she didn't get the question at first and whispered something to herself and then said, "I'm Mia from class 3B. I nodded and went back to music class, where, by the way, I realized I'd left the sketchbook again, typical me. When class ended, I went straight to 3B. I kind of peeked through the door's little glass window, and there's no sign of her. The teacher noticed me, asked what I needed, and I explained about Mia and my markers. She looked around confused, and she said no one by that name was in her class. She even called out the name Mia to the students, and no one responded. Confused, but not freaked out yet. I checked every 3rd and 2nd grade class. Nothing, no Mia, no one who matched the description. I let it go for the day, and I mean, it is a big school, kids mix up their classes all the time. But the next day, nothing. Day after that, still nothing. By day 3, I was less worried about meeting a ghost and more furious that my expensive markers were gone. I even went to the principal. They let me check the attendance records, and there was no Mia, no similar face, and nothing like that. So to this day, I tell people a mysterious entity swindled me out of my markers. I'm not scared about it, I just want them back. They were the good kind, imported, and my mom made me promise to take care of them. And now, years later, I still think about it sometimes. So hey, if you're out there, marker thief, ghost or not, can I please have them back? I have a feeling I know the kind of markers that you're talking about. And those are good. The Lights at Yucca Inn. Happened to someone I know really well. His wife has always been the nature adventure type. The kind of person who owns 3 different hiking boots for different trails, but my friend He was more of a backyard barbecue and Netflix guy, at least until she came along. So one spring she plans a little family getaway. A few days of hiking around Joshua Tree National Park. That's because they have a toddler now, and she books their nights at the Yucca Inn, a rustic old motel just outside the park. The drive goes smoothly. They take turns hiking with the baby in a little carrier strapped to his chest. By the third night, everyone's exhausted, sunburned, and dusty and happy. They all crawl into an old wooden-framed bed in their room, baby between them. Sometime past midnight, my friend wakes up because the baby lets out a soft whimper. He gently rocks her back to sleep, but now he's wide awake, staring up at the ceiling. That's when something strange happens. Above them hangs an old wagon wheel chandelier with half the bulbs missing. It begins to glow, but not like somebody flicked the switch. It flares up slowly, glowing much brighter than a normal bulb should. A cold, sharp kind of light. It then just as slowly fades back into darkness. No click, no sound, just light and then nothing. He tells himself it's probably an old wiring issue. Place looks like it hasn't seen real maintenance since the 60s. But then, as he's lying there trying to convince himself, two soft blue orbs of light drift into view at the foot of the bed. His first instinct is to leap out, turn the light on, but he freezes. What if he wakes his wife and the baby, panics them, and then turns out to be nothing? He pulls the sheet over his head like a kid and hopes it'll just go away. But through the thin motel sheet, he can still see the glow, a faint blue shimmer. And then comes the pressure. It starts at his ankles, light at first, like someone gently pressing down. Then it slides up his legs, firm but not painful. By the time it reaches his chest, his heart is hammering so hard he swears the thing's pressing on him and he can feel it. A soft hissing sound follows. Not loud, but steady, like air escaping from a cracked tire. He doesn't move, doesn't breathe too loud. He tells himself it's a dream, because what else could it be? And just as suddenly as it came, the pressure lifts. The light vanishes. The room goes dead silent again. He stays awake the rest of the night, occasionally sleeping with the phone's flashlight around the corners of the room. Nothing. At dawn, he gently shakes his wife awake and says he wants to leave early, to quote-unquote beat traffic. Well, she doesn't question it. They pack their things and drive off before the sun is fully up. He doesn't tell her what happened. Not that morning, not that week. It's only months later, sitting across from me at his backyard fire pit with the flames crackling between us, that he finally let it just spill, and well, I look up the Yucca Inn later, and turns out back in the day it was a popular spot for B-list movie stars filming westerns. And one story sticks out. A heartbroken actress who ended her life in one of the rooms. Guests have written online about weird lights, footsteps, and pressure on their beds at night. I ask him which room they stayed in. He says he doesn't remember the number, but his eyes tell me he's pretty sure. Must have been that room. And whatever was there was still waiting. The room that wouldn't sleep. I've lived in the same house since the day I was born. And everyone's moved out, too. And it is an old, creaky house with the kind of floors that remember every step that you made. And of course, a house this old has its stories. A few people have died here over the years. Never thought much of it, though, and for context, I don't really believe in the supernatural. Maybe I'm agnostic, maybe just indifferent. That's why everything that happened later messed with my head so much. It was a quiet winter night. I was lying next to my sibling, both of us scrolling through our phones before drifting off. My sibling falls asleep fast, like knockout in 5 minutes fast. I usually end up awake staring at the ceiling. That night, I woke up around 1:30 a.m. and everything was still. The air was so cold I could hear the smallest sounds clearly. Then it began, a rattling noise. Sharp and steady, it was coming from the tall cupboard by the bed. The glass panels on its doors were shaking, and at first I thought it was my half-dreaming brain playing tricks. The sound didn't stop because it got louder, and I froze under the blanket and forced myself to sleep. It didn't happen just once. It was night after night I heard it again. When I told my family, they shrugged off and said, "It's just the wood expanding, probably a mouse. You're tired." But I knew how clear that sound was. And my sibling heard it too. It was one night and they just turned pale and made it real for both of us. A few nights later, I decided to actually look. I slid on my glasses and turned toward the cupboard, and everything sitting on top of it, boxes and bottles and random junk, was trembling. Not just the glass panels. The whole thing was moving, and that was enough for me. I grabbed my pillow, ran out, and spent the night in the study room. But years did pass. I still refused to sleep there, so my siblings had the room to themselves. And then one night they told me the bed started shaking, violently, like something underneath was pushing it. They thought it was an earthquake, and it wasn't. It kept happening for several nights, and then they left the room too. But the strangeness didn't stop there. I started waking up with random scratches on my arms, ones I couldn't explain. We all got sick more often, and my dad, who never admits fear, quietly moved to another room and never returned to that one again. And as someone who doesn't believe in ghosts, I've tried everything to explain it. I talked to friends, I researched late at night, and convinced myself it's physics. Old wood and nerves, but deep down it doesn't add up. If it's in my head, why did my siblings hear and feel it too, and why did my dad avoid that room entirely? No one has an answer. Whispers in the dark. When I was 10, my grandpa was visiting. I remember it clearly because that night was the first time I ever saw the E.T. movie. And it was late, probably around 1 a.m. My 2 cats were curled up underneath my blanket as usual. I woke up to their low, uneasy hissing. At first I thought they were just fighting, but when I sat up all I saw was the faint glow of the nightlight casting shadows across the wall. I lay back down. But a while later, their hissing turned into a deep growl. When I looked toward the corner, there was a tall figure with no face standing by the dresser. It was facing the wall, but completely still. I jumped out of bed and ran down the hall to my grandparents' room. My grandpa told me to lie down between them. And that's the last thing I remember from that night. Another story comes from my sister. And every summer we'd spend time in a small house her grandparents had in Lancaster. She once told me that while at night she would see a little girl in a white nightgown walking past her open bedroom door, just pacing slowly back and forth as if waiting for something. She never said anything, just would walk. And there was also one summer I stayed alone at my grandparents' house. I was definitely 10. I woke up in the dark with that sharp feeling that someone was standing right behind me. Couldn't hear anything, but it felt like there were eyes locked on me from somewhere close. I panicked so badly I screamed for my grandpa. He rushed in carrying a small silver cross and sprinkling holy water on the floor, praying out loud for whatever was there to leave. I don't remember much after that, but the next day I felt strange, like the world wasn't fully real anymore. For years after, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder, convinced something was always there. When my grandparents moved closer to town and got their own apartment, things didn't really stop. I was 17 and often spent the night there on their pull-out couch. One night I woke up lying on my side, facing the TV that was just a foot away from me. My whole body was frozen and I couldn't even breathe properly. Then the TV screen, though off, started glowing, faintly at first, then brighter and brighter with a strange gold-white light. A shadowed hand stretched across the screen, growing larger until it almost touched my face. Then a man's silhouette stepped out of the light, and the room filled with a low humming sound that made my teeth ache. I squeezed my eyes shut and the noise rose like static. When I opened them again, it was morning, and I know it wasn't a dream because my dreams never feel that real. The most recent thing happened just a few weeks ago. My best friend slept over and used the spare room, my grandma's old room. And in the middle of the night, a framed photo kept sliding off the shelf and hitting the floor. Next morning, I checked, and the way it was placed, it couldn't have fallen without being pushed. She told me it happened at least 4 times, and she had to wedge a pillow in front of it to make it stop. And she also said she heard footsteps on the old wooden floor and the creaks echoing like someone moving around slowly. So yeah, weird stuff. Tried to explain it all away, but late at night it still feels like someone's watching. The shadow by the basement door. So I'm scrolling back to this page after a late night bathroom run. That was after I did all of my research about beaver nuggets and the like, and well, my girlfriend texted me saying she saw something moving in the hallway. It was right by her bedroom. It was just a few feet from where I was. She said it looked like something was sliding across the floor toward my son's room. And honestly, that alone was enough to make my stomach drop. So here goes. My co-signed ghost story from about 22, maybe 24 years ago when I was maybe 10 or 12. My parents had split before I was old enough to remember much. I stayed with my mom during the year and spent summers with my dad in Pittsburgh. He was living with his girlfriend back then, and in this house her parents had given her, well, people in the neighborhood whispered that something had died in their basement a long time ago. Not murder, just a quiet tragedy. Never went down there at night, and the whole vibe was wrong and cold and heavy. Most of my dad's side of the family, grandparents and cousins, lived in Pittsburgh too. One summer night, my cousin Tara, a year older than me, stayed over, and Dad had gone to a bar with his girlfriend being upstairs. Okay. Tara and I were camped in the living room right next to the kitchen. Basement door was in there, and we were feeling brave and decided to watch the X-Files. Funny, I never realized how, well, at least until now, how creepy that intro music really is. It is actually fantastic, but anyway. We barely go through the opening theme before deciding to grab some snacks. As we step into the kitchen and reach for the light switch, it's like we both just froze there, because something tall, dark, and shaped like a person was moving toward us from the basement door. There was no sound, just a slow, deliberate shape gliding forwards. We didn't even look at each other, and we screamed in perfect sync and bolted up the stairs to my dad's girlfriend's room. We never saw it again, but we both saw it that night. And I wish more than anything that Tara were still alive to talk about it. She passed in 2018, and that was the last summer I went to my dad's before everything fell apart and contact stopped completely. I never asked her about it again, but I know she remembered, because how could she not? A softer memory. My sister and I both swear we saw my pap at Grandma's house, and that was years after he passed. We used to sleep in that living room. Through a small opening in the wall, you could see the hallway. and we both on different nights described him wearing that same old red flannel shirt, just walking quietly through the hall like he used to. It wasn't scary, it was just there. This basement one, though, still gives me goosebumps even now. I'm sitting here staring at the dark doorway of her bedroom, hoping I don't see whatever she thought she saw. She's fast asleep. Probably woke up when I got up to use the bathroom, though. But still, that hallway feels too quiet. Sounds like a good hallway to me. Echoes in the trees. I'm 15. Me and my cousin lived close to a forest that's always had something wrong about it. It's split into two places, the upper side where my aunt said she once heard something following her, and the lower side where everything got stranger. And about 4 years ago, I saw something standing between two birch trees in broad daylight. It wasn't tall, maybe the height of a 10-year-old kid, and it wore something like an oversized dark cloak. Its head was smooth, round, and pale like paper. No mouth, no ears, just two black empty holes for eyes. It didn't walk, it swayed slowly, side to side, like it was floating in place, and I whispered, "Hello?" Tilted its head, but it didn't answer. We stared at each other for about 10 seconds. I took a step back to grab my phone, and it was gone. For years, I avoided that spot. Even when I walked nearby, the air felt too still, like something was holding its breath. And last month, my cousin saw it too, only this time its face was blank. At first, he thought it was maybe my aunt in a white shawl. When it started moving, he froze. And later, when he compared what we saw, it matched exactly, except for the missing eyes. My aunt told us about something chasing her years ago. It was up in the upper forest near an old birch tree. You never saw its face, only a pale blur, and when she ran back home, her neighbor's dog started howling. Whatever was behind her vanished, and that birch was cut down a year later. Everything went quiet. At least up there. But the lower woods never seemed to. Last summer, we started hearing this rhythmic thumping in the ground, like someone tapping the soil with a stick wrapped in leather. Well, that's a specific sound. Went on for nearly an hour. And our dog disappears almost every night now, comes back at dawn. He refuses to go near the lower ledge, and even when we try to drag him there, he shakes. Last night, me and my cousin were talking on the porch about asking a local spiritual healer for help, and right when my cousin joked about calling it out, something heavy rustled through the trees, closer than ever before. He'd shouted into the woods a few nights ago, cursing whatever lives there, and I told him it was a bad idea. Now I'm starting to really believe that it was. Tomorrow we're going to talk to someone, and this time we won't leave anything out. If anyone's ever dealt with something like this, we'd be grateful for any advice. Well, written for 15 years old, wink wink. The Final Gaze. It was nearly 3 in the morning when the wind began to howl, dragging its cold breath through the old courtyard like a wandering soul that had lost its way. The trees, skeletal and stiff, rattled against each other until their shadows braided across the morning hall floor, thin and black like cracks in old porcelain. Thunder murmured far away, lightning tore the night open in thin ghostly seams, illuminating the long room where the scent of incense had long since grown bitter. I sat alone in the front row. The single bulb above me flickered like a dying pulse. And there was just this trembling. It was as though it too feared to shine too brightly. The portrait of the departed hung above the altar, but something in it unsettled me. Perhaps it was the slight curl of the lips that hadn't been there before, or the way the eyes in that sickly light seemed to follow each shallow breath I would take. And then came the whisper. Not from the wind, not from the house. A dragging, dry sound rose from beneath the incense table. A sound too deliberate to be imagined, and I froze, and then something moved. A white dog, small and soaked from the rain, crawled out from the darkness. Its fur, slicked to its thin frame, made it look less like a creature of warmth and more like a ghost wearing a body. Its eyes seemed to glimmer, not yellow, but a milky, clouded silver that fixed on me with unnerving clarity. It made no bark, no sound at all, just looked as if it had been waiting. But we had never owned a dog. And my mother's voice, a memory stirred. When a dog cries at night, the dead are listening. The dog lifted its head and released a sound that was neither a growl nor a whimper. It was low and wet and wrong, and then slowly it turned its gaze away from me and toward the coffin behind the altar. A creak broke the air like a snapped bone, and the coffin trembled, and in that instant I understood. The dog's warning had never been for me. Well, excuse me. The Night at Ridge Hollow. I was in Shenandoah, near a spot called Whispering Ridge, about 8 months ago. I decided to camp out there, even though the temperature at night was barely above freezing. So I pulled into a small gravel parking area around 7 a.m., surprised not to see a single car. My plan was to hike in, spend the night, and head back the next morning. By the time I finished the trail and looped halfway back to set up camp, it was about 3 in the afternoon. I spent the rest of daylight cooking a small meal, watching the fog roll through the trees, and letting myself get lost in the quiet. As dusk crept in, I hung all my trash and food in a bag about 150 feet away, high in a branch, just in case of any hungry visitors. And the forest had this soft hum, sort of breathing silence, and I remember feeling both calm and weirdly exposed. Around 7 p.m., I was exhausted. Gathered some dead branches near a huge splintered oak tree to build a fire. And that's when I heard it, a sharp, fast rustling moving toward me from maybe 100 feet away. It wasn't a squirrel or a deer, it was heavier. The moment I stopped moving, it stopped too. With my heart beating, I slowly backed toward my tent, shining my flashlight at the tree line. The beam just disappeared into darkness. Nothing moved, nothing answered. And it was about 8:15 by then. I sat by the fire, feeding it piece after piece of wood, and its weak light painting everything with a shaky gold that made me feel more visible than safe. After maybe 20 minutes, I finally slipped into my tent. Just as my mind began to drift toward sleep, I heard it, a low, drawn-out sound like someone singing through clenched teeth. It was faint, far away at first. But then, as if something invisible were walking toward me, the sound felt louder and closer. In less than a minute, it felt like it was just beyond the edge of my campsite. And every nerve in my body was lighting up, and I shot upright, listening. It wasn't words, it was a kind of chanting, soft and rhythmic in a woman's voice, but wrong somehow, like it wasn't meant for my human ears. Then silence. I unzipped the tent slowly and stepped out, shouting, "Who's out there?" The forest swallowed my voice whole, and I swept my flashlight in wide arcs. And that's when I saw her, or something, for less than a second. A woman, barefoot, wearing a pale nightgown streaked with mud, was gliding away from the tree line like smoke in the wind. She was bald, and her arms jerked through the air in uneven twitching motions. She made no sound, just ran. My brain froze, I couldn't even scream. Tears just started running down my face. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped my pack. Didn't even care about the tent anymore, I just bolted. I hit the trail as fast as my legs would allow, with the weight of my pack bouncing against me. The night was slick and uneven, roots everywhere, the kind of darkness that makes even your breath sound too loud. At one point, I slipped on loose dirt and slammed my knee into the ground, and in that split second, as my headlamp swung wild, caught her shape again. They were standing perfectly still and watching. I kept going. The chanting was gone, but the forest wasn't silent anymore. Something was moving behind me, multiple somethings. Twigs snapping, footsteps, not animal ones, human or close to it. When I reached the flat, grassy stretch near the end of the trail, everything went quiet for just a breath. Then the noise erupted from all directions at once, rustling and whispering fast. I sprinted the last stretch to the trailhead, lungs burning, and finally saw the faint outline of my car. As I swung my headlamp behind me, 3 figures identical to the woman I'd seen burst from the tree line. But they didn't run, they crawled on all fours and fast. When the light hit them, they scattered like something feral, melting back into the darkness of the woods. I remember putting the key in the ignition. I just remember speeding down the empty road, sobbing with my hands white-knuckled on the wheel. Even miles away, I swear I could still hear that faint, sickening chant. The night I met the guardian of the garden. This spring I decided to start a little herb patch of my own. I planted mint and cherry tomatoes, and just last week a few rows of rosemary. Nice. My cousin warned me not to leave it unprotected because the stray cats in the neighborhood like to use people's gardens as their playground. But me, being a stubborn beginner, figured it couldn't be that bad. For weeks, everything grew better than expected. No cat tracks, no missing leaves. It almost felt like my tiny garden was charmed. Then last Saturday, I noticed a cluster of tiny white flowers creeping along the edge of the soil. Thinking they were weeds, I yanked them out without much thought. And later that evening, while driving to the market, I started to feel a strange warm sensation spreading across my right shoulder blade. And it was a muggy night, so I shrugged it off. The next day, more of those white flowers appeared. I knelt down, pulled them again, and went back inside. That evening in the shower, the warmth on my shoulder turned into a sharp, steady burn. Imagine leaning too close to a campfire for too long. That's exactly what it felt like. Heat was pulsing against my skin. I called my best friend to take a look, and when they checked, their eyebrows shot up. Were you scratching your back or something? I told them no, and they showed me a picture. 4 faint but angry-looking lines across my shoulder blade. No broken skin, but bright red like they just appeared there. So we sat in the kitchen trying to figure it out. Was it my new laundry detergent? Well, no, that wouldn't explain the scratches. Did I brush against something sharp? I mean, not that I could remember. Then I thought about the flowers. This is the only thing that had changed. My grandmother used to tell stories about earth guardians, spirits that take the shape of local animals to protect certain places. When I was a kid, she used to say fox spirits liked gardens that smelled of rosemary. I'd laughed it off then, but now I really wasn't so sure. My friend pointed out that the scratches looked like they came from something with claws, not human. It made sense. No cats, no birds, no damage to the plants. Maybe something else was keeping them away. That night, I brought out some leftover grilled fish, something fox spirits supposedly liked. According to Grandma, I set it on the edge of the herb patch. The neighbor's golden retriever, usually a shameless food thief, came bounding down the driveway but stopped abruptly halfway. He tilted his head, wagged his tail nervously, but didn't come closer. I placed the fish carefully in the soil, whispered a quiet apology, and promised not to touch the flowers again. An hour later, the burning on my back faded completely. When my friend checked the scratches again, they were gone. Not lighter, but actually gone. And this morning when I stepped outside, the spot where I'd left the offering was clean. No trace of fish bones, and the white flowers had grown a few inches taller overnight. I don't know if fox spirits are real, but something is watching over my garden, and honestly, I'm okay with that. The Laundry Room Mystery. We've been living in this house almost 16 years now. It's a sturdy old place built back in 1920, and it has its own, personality. When we first moved in, there were a few strange little things. Nothing dramatic, just the sound of faint footsteps late at night going up and down the hallway. There was sounds of something brushing softly against the old plaster walls, and sometimes an old clinking noise. It's like when kids pull their blankets a little bit higher. Stopped after a couple of weeks, and for years the house was quiet. But lately, something's been happening again. Mostly harmless stuff at first, like knocks on the walls where there's no pipes. Maybe the light tapping of fingertips on glass panels of the double doors leading to the front porch. Always brief and always when no one was near. And then came the night with the laundry. We have 3 kids, and that evening my wife and our eldest, I'm going to call him boy number 1, went down to the laundry room to start a wash before heading out for groceries. My daughter and I stayed in the living room watching a movie, and boy number 2 is upstairs absorbed in his game console. As she walked out the door, my wife reminded us to toss the clothes into a dryer once the washer was done, and predictably we forgot. About an hour later, they returned. She called out from the hallway, "Did anyone move the laundry?" I told her no, and she sighed and went down to do it herself. Seconds later, she yelled up the stairs, "Boy number 1, why would you do this?" Boy number 1 stood by the door, blinked at her, and said, "Do what?" "You left half the clothes in the basket, and they're wet." He frowned, "But you saw me put everything in the washer." And she had. They both remembered clearly. The basket was empty, and the machine was humming when they left. When she went back down, half the clothes were sitting neatly in the basket, damp as if the spin cycle had already finished. Other half remained in the washer. And there's no shortcut to the laundry room. The only way down is through the kitchen door, the stubborn old back entrance that screeches when it moves. And trust me, if anybody had opened it, we would have heard. Boy number 2 never came downstairs. My daughter and I stayed in the living room the whole time, and no wet footprints, no creaks, no movement, just half a load of laundry mysteriously transferred from washer to basket while no one was down there. If the clothes had been dry, we could have shrugged it off as a simple mistake, but they were freshly spun and damp as if someone or something had helped out with the chore. I know how this sounds, but this house has a way of reminding us we're not always alone. The house that kept its ghost. A friend once told me I should share my story with people who have open minds, so here I am. The house I live in isn't just old, it still has someone living here who's not quite alive. I bought this house with my husband in the summer of 2019, built in 1927, and has been part of this family for nearly a century now. My husband's great-grandfather built it by hand with the help of his brothers, and after he passed away, it went to my husband's great-aunt and then eventually to his uncle. Since his uncle has his own home and was getting too tired to maintain this place, he sold it to us. The house was in lovely shape, just needed some sanding, paint, and new light fixtures. We always wondered why his uncle had gone through so many tenants over the years. The house was warm and sunlit and full of character. But of course, that was before we understood why. The first time I saw him was 2 days before moving in. My husband and I are hanging up curtains in the front room. I remember turning to grab the next curtain from him and catching a sight of a man standing just behind him. He looked about 5'10", wearing a dark suit and a fedora hat like someone straight out of the 30s. He had no color but grayscale, like an old film reel, and for the briefest moment we locked eyes, and then calmly he turned and walked right through the wall. I stood there frozen with my heart hammering in my chest, and I didn't say anything to my husband. I told myself I was exhausted and stressed from packing. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me. A few weeks later, the house had settled, but he hadn't, because at night we heard light footsteps in the hallway, knocking at random hours and the soft sound of floorboards creaking where no one walked. My dog would suddenly stare into corners and bark like someone was standing there. So one evening over dinner, when the family was swapping out stories, I finally mentioned it. My husband's grandmother chuckled and told me to describe the man. She quietly left the table and came back with an old black and white photograph. I swear, I felt the blood draining from my face because it was him. "That's Arthur," she said, tapping the photo. "He built the house with his own hands and died right here in the parlor." At first I was terrified, but over time something shifted. Arthur never did anything violent. He doesn't slam doors or throw things. He just exists here quietly. And now when I came home, I say hello to him out loud. I even started leaving fresh marigolds near the old rocking chair by the window. That's where he makes his presence known most often. And sometimes at dusk I'll see a faint gray silhouette there, and almost always, if something unusual happens, the air carries the faint smell of pipe tobacco. Neither me nor my husband smoke. My husband refuses to believe it. He says acknowledging it would make it too real, and I understand. I used to be a skeptic too. But living here has changed that. It's strange. Sometimes it's unnerving, but it's oddly comforting. Arthur is as much a part of this house as the wood beams and creaky floors, and I guess in a way we're roommates now.
Someone explain, please. The first experience I've had took place in an old town in England. It's called Stratford. It's upon Avon, which my family and I were visiting on holiday. On one of the days we were walking, spotted an old museum called Sheev's House. We walked in and instantly felt something off or creepy about the place. It was extremely old and had loads of wax figures dotted around. Anyway, while we were exploring the museum, me and my dad and sister went ahead leaving my mom in her room by herself. This is where it gets weird. My mom reported having her jumper pulled aggressively from behind while she was reading an article. She turned around thinking it was me or my sister messing around, but to her surprise, there was not a single person in the room. She was confused, and after telling us about what had happened, my dad spoke to the owner of the place, in which he casually responded, "Oh, and that would be Lee." The owner explained Lee was one of the many people that haunted the museum, and he liked to grab attractive women during his life, and had followed suit as spirit. He also showed us a file that read that it was Lee's anniversary of death, and that he's usually most active at this time. He then went on to show us many files of ghost hunters that had explored the place, and also showed us short clips of documentaries that had been filmed in there. If you search up Sheev's House, it's got a long documented list as one of the most haunted buildings in England. The owner also ran ghost tours at night, which me and my dad attended but didn't see anything. Anyway, my mom's convinced that her jumper was pulled, and the fact the building is known for being haunted is undoubtedly strange. This next experience is even more creepy. Coming back from a vacation in the south of France, I guess, my family and I stopped at an old sort of family-run hotel place as we were driving and needed to split up the journey. I'm not sure what to call it. It wasn't a hotel as such, but almost like a big house which you could rent a room in. The family cooked for us, and although the building was old, nothing seemed too off about it. Anyway, me and my sister went to sleep in one room and my parents were in the other. And in the middle of the night I heard a smash come from their room. I remember being scared. went back to sleep, not daring to investigate. In my morning, my parents were freaked out. They told us that in the night they could constantly hear footsteps next to them and floorboards creaking. I then found out that the smash I heard the night before was the light bulb, and how that had happened freaked me out more than anything. Left in my parents' room by the owners, there was a bat with a bit of a string on it and a ball at the end attached to the string. An old-fashioned kid's toy, basically, where you repeatedly hit the ball back and forth. But anyway, my mom had told me after she woke up to the light bulb smashing. The bat and ball had moved onto the bed from its original position. It was under where the light bulb was, surrounded by glass. My parents spoke to the owners of the house same morning. They were acting strange, being very quick to shut off the conversation and change the topic. I'll keep this last experience short. A couple of years ago, my dad and I went skiing in Italy, stayed at an old hotel which was previously on war grounds. I remember coming back one night and going to the toilet to find the emergency string in the shower swaying rapidly side to side. Called out for my dad to come and see it, and instantly stopped in front of my eyes. At the same hotel, they had a sauna in the basement. The man behind the desk sort of led me into the basement to use it. I was the only person in the sauna. Once I was done, I tried to leave the basement, but the door was locked. I tried to call my dad to let me into the basement door, but had no service. And after a while, my dad and the guy behind the desk came to look for me, and they simply opened the door as if it wasn't locked. I then said that it was locked and I couldn't get out, and the man behind the desk looked at me confused and pleaded that it wasn't. How do you explain this stuff other than ghosts must be real? Everybody I tell hears me out, but naturally takes it with a pinch of salt and tries to somehow find an explanation, even though there is no rational one. Even though I've never seen a ghost with my eyes, I can't deny their existence. I'm being warned in my dreams about my granddad's house. Okay, so since I was young, I would always have the same weird dreams of my granddad's house. And ever since I started talking about it again, wondering if anybody in my family was spiritually aligned, or anything about the house, the dreams have come back, but almost in a warning. The dreams are always the same. Me in his living room, sitting on the couch just underneath the picture of my gran that I never met, who died in the house. My granddad's dog would always be in the dreams, but she would sit at the living room door. The dreams would always start off almost normal, and then his dog would start barking. Never got up from the couch in my dreams or opened the door. Always felt like something was there standing outside it. Then the room would rather violently, and just I'd wake up. The room would rather violently. It's weird that I'd consistently have the same dreams as a child, around 7 to 10, and now I'm 19. And what's also weird is that I was told that my granddad and gran had a dog that would sit at the living room door and bark at it. Who, coincidence? I wasn't told that until recently. Since I was young, I was obsessed with the paranormal. So I've always believed that there's a possible stage between life and death. So you could say some of the feelings I felt of the house were just because I was consuming so much media that I was biased on the paranormal, but not really. I used to stay at his house a lot when I was young, with my cousins, and I had a really weird experience with sweets being thrown around the room. When my granddad came back into the living room to ask what we were screaming about, told him, and he said his actual words are, "It's probably just your Granny Mary." Oh, wow, right? I'd like to think of it as she was playing with us, but I don't know. There was a time when me and my cousin were in his bedroom, where my gran died in, which I was told this very recently, and the TV moved. Really freaked me and my cousin out. And yeah, there's probably explanations to why it moved, but I don't know. I've had sleep paralysis in the house, and I used to sleepwalk a lot there, which I rarely did as a kid. My mom also told me recently that he used to have a parrot, and the parrot would always say, "Margaret," at the same time every single day. My granddad would say, "That's Mary getting up." Yeah, not freaky at all. So that's the context. Really weird shit. There's probably more like his back room and garden had a really weird energy about it. Also had really weird dreams about his garden. Now to what's been happening recently. Me and my friend were talking about all that type of shit like a week ago or 2 weeks ago. I was telling her about my granddad's house and how I always felt a really weird energy. And that something's definitely going on there. Then I started to wonder if anybody else in my family was, into all that and could see stuff or was just spiritually aligned, so I asked my mom and she said that before my gran was like that, kind of, and I'd have to ask my granddad if I wanted to know more. So on Friday, I was like, okay, I'm seeing my dad, which is tomorrow and Saturday. Maybe I could ask him. Tell him why when I go to sleep I have a dream that I'm in front of my granddad's house with my dad and granddad. I break the ice. My granddad was his usual self in the dream, until I asked him about my gran, and if she possibly was like that or could see things that others couldn't. His face drops and he gets mad. He was like, don't talk about that, don't ask me that. Like shouting at me. Then I woke up and was like, wow, okay. Early Monday morning, and I kept waking up and going back to sleep. I had dreams of the house. Dream 1. I was outside the house with my granddad again. And the way I would describe the house was that his normal front door was there, but then there was another door-shaped hole in the outside door, but with no door. He would start whistling. My granddad whistles, by the way, just to say. Maybe not connected to the dream, but weird in this context of the dream. And there was like a high-pitched screeching noise coming from inside the house. Never heard that noise in the dream I used to have. It was like it was responding back to him, and then I woke up. Dream 2 again. I was with my granddad, and we were walking toward his house. Got in the same position we were in Dream 1. He starts to whistle again, and there was a high-pitched screeching. However, this time I started to whistle, and we were almost whistling at the same time. The screeching got louder and closer. We stopped whistling for a second, then we whistled again, and suddenly this black orb comes zooming out through the door-shaped hole, throws my granddad in the air, like, okay. Now what? It turns and looks at me. I'm like pleading at this point, saying sorry. Then as soon as it tries to throw me or go through me, I woke up, and when I woke up I immediately sat up and was like, what the hell was that all about? So yeah, I started to talk about weird, consistent dreams I used to have about my granddad's house when I was younger. Start to question it, and it's like I'm getting warned in my dreams to not question it, but like I want to question it. I'm practicing tarot right now, and I do think that I 100% should not ask my deck about it. Lived in a haunted apartment for a year. This happened to me, a 33-year-old male, in late 2016 till early 2017. I was in the military stationed in Tampa, Florida. I was 24 years old at the time. I had a roommate who was also in the military. We had been living together since we first moved out of the dorms on base. He got selected for deployment. I couldn't find a new roommate, so we broke the lease. I then got an apartment by myself. Nothing strange happened at first. It wasn't my first time living alone, but something about the place made me uncomfortable. It wasn't a cheap apartment, though, and I only had a year left till my contract was up, so I would separate from the military service. So I sucked it up and stayed, which was a bad decision. I started to get sleep paralysis. Never heard of it or experienced it before this. Naturally, I freaked out, and the longer I stayed in the apartment, the more frequent it would happen, till eventually it was an every night thing. I'd wake up unable to move and would see a dark figure standing in my bedroom doorway. It would just stand there and stare at me, and had this melting look to it, as if parts of it were going to drip off of it. I went and seen a doctor. He told me about sleep paralysis, explained to me what it was and what it was. Probably just stress that was causing it. I believed him as everything he said lined up with what I was dealing with. However, Soon afterwards, things escalated. I started feeling like something was trying to drag me off the bed at night when I'd wake, still unable to move or even make noise. If you have problems with sleep paralysis yourself, then you'll know what I mean. My voice would come out in croaks. When I would snap out of the paralysis, I'd be in my bed in my usual sleeping position as if nothing happened. Then one night all that changed. Instead of feeling like something was dragging me off the bed, I actually was dragged. Something grabbed my arm and pulled me down between the bed and the wall. My arm was stuck and I could feel a hand around my forearm. This was not sleep paralysis. I was wide awake both before and after the event. The last event that made me finally move out happened a few weeks before my lease was over. I had fallen asleep in my stomach, woke up to the same feeling, unable to move or speak, the feeling of someone watching me, then a pressure on my back. It felt like someone or something was sitting on my back, and I swear I could feel it breathing on the back of my neck. What snapped me out of the paralyzed state was a searing pain across my back. I immediately shot up and left the apartment. Had 3 long scratches like claws down my back. I ended up not breaking the lease and just crashed at a friend and coworker's place for a few weeks. Only ever went back to this apartment to grab my stuff. The time we went to an abandoned insane asylum, but ended up running for our life. This happened when I was a 33-year-old male, when I, a 33-year-old male, was 16. I didn't get my driver's license until I was 18, but my friend, let's call him Gary, got his. Now, we lived in a pretty small town in North Carolina, the type of town where all the high school kids, me included at the time, hung out in the Walmart parking lot. There was nothing better to do. So me and Gary had been friends since the beginning of high school. Met in one of our classes freshman year. Gary was into the spooky stuff, and so was I. Not long after getting his license, he comes to me with an idea. He tells me about some apparently old abandoned insane asylum a few towns over. Says it's back in the woods somewhere, isn't even visible from the road anymore. He wants us all to go out there in the middle of the night and check it out because it's supposed to be haunted by the patients that died there or something. Of course, nobody wants to go with him but me. So the following weekend, we decide we're going to sneak out and check this place out. It takes us a while to get there and figure out where exactly this place is. Finally, we find the place that we can park the car, follow the trail up to the asylum. We arrive at an old-ass building. Not sure if it was actually an asylum or just some building. It was definitely old and had plants growing all over it. It's possible a sign for the place was somewhere hidden in the brush. We walk into the building, there's no door. The inside's covered in graffiti, all kinds of stuff. Some kind of funny and others disturbing. The place definitely felt and looked spooky. We didn't end up staying long. We had been inside maybe 10 minutes or so, exploring the few rooms near the front of the building. Then a loud bang goes off. Not a gunshot bang, but like something really heavy fell to the floor. Me and Gary freeze. We turned to look at the doorway of the room the noise came from at the end of the hallway. A wheelchair slowly rolled into view from the room. And in this wheelchair is an old doll. And if you know what a Raggedy Ann doll is, then picture that. Well, that was enough for me and Gary. We decided to just head back to the car. We're walking back to the car through the trail, and we're both obviously scared, but neither of us want to show it or admit it. As we're walking, we hear something move around in the woods. Me and Gary don't speak a word to each other or even look at each other, but we both immediately take off running. Whatever it was that we had heard had started chasing us. We could hear it running in the woods next to us. And luckily, we made it back to the car and took off. Didn't look back and never saw what it was that was after us. For all we know, it's just some animal. But looking back at this now, I'm not sure what's scarier. The fact that we possibly ran into a ghost or spirit, or that maybe we aren't alone out there. A Haunted 4th of July. With the 4th of July quickly approaching, thought I'd share one of my most unexplainable events to date. This takes place almost 15 years ago in my old neighborhood in San Bernardino, California. Growing up, I lived in the same house since I was several months old. The house itself was haunted, or at least held a lot of residual energy from previous families living in it. But this story isn't about my house, but my friend's house directly across the street from mine. From what I remember, the original house had burned down. I was really young, around 3 or 4 years old, and still remember the charred remains standing there for the longest time. I don't remember the fire, though, so I'm not sure if it happened before moving in or during the first few years after. I don't know the details, like if anybody died or anything, but when I was around 5-ish, they demolished the remains and built a new house. Shortly after, a family moved in. The little girl living there became one of my best friends. But I never went over to play because my parents were really strict. Plus, her family were gang members. Whoa. Even though her parents were good people, my parents didn't want me going over there, just in case. Yeah. They lived there for several years. My friend never mentioned anything spooky going on in the house. However, she did mention that her mom had seen some things in my house, with one being about seeing a little boy disappearing by the side of my house. I've never seen a little boy or felt the presence of one, so I'm not sure if it was true or not. One day they decided to move out, and another family moved in, but for a short period of time since the house ended up being too large for the woman and her kids, and she decided to downsize and move into a house behind the house in question. This was a 2-home lot owned by the same landlord. During this lady's move, my other friend that lived next door to me and her family decided to move over to the one across from me. Now that I was older, my parents didn't care if I hung out over at their place, so I helped them move and practically existed over there all the time after school. Prior to the main story, there had been times that things seemed off in the house. I once babysat my friend's baby brother, and there would be noises coming from the kitchen and hallway. I thought it was their cat messing around. On another occasion, I'm hanging out with her and her brother, who was around her age. I was on my laptop sitting on their couch, and they'd gone into the kitchen. Shortly afterwards, out of my peripheral, I thought I had seen her brother come back, and I was standing facing me in the hallway, in front of the bathroom. But when I asked him a question, he didn't answer. When I turned my head, there was no one there. So anyway, it was the 4th of July, I'm not sure in the year, maybe 18 or 19 years old, and my friend 15 or 16. Their family going to watch fireworks at the San Manuel Stadium. She didn't want to go and decided to stay and hang out with me and my parents, since we're going to have a little cookout. After we ate, we sat on the curb and watched the neighbors lighting fireworks. Shortly after, she went over to her house. I don't remember for what, but when she tried to get in, the door was locked. What was strange about it was that her family never locks the door, and no one was home. Plus, they knew she was staying behind, and they also had their dog there. So she needed access in order to let her out to go potty and stuff. After a while, we decided to check if any of the windows were open so we could get inside. I was hesitant just in case somebody might have snuck in like a burglar or a crackhead, but we ended up finding a bat just in case. Luckily, her mom's window was unlocked, and with a boost, I was able to get through the window. I met her at the door. When she came out, she said that it was strange that the deadbolt was locked. Her parents don't have a key to the deadbolt, only the bottom doorknob, so it wouldn't have been a way for them to lock it from the outside. We did a quick search, and no one was in the house, only the cat and the dog, with the dog looking visibly nervous. When her parents came back home, we asked them about the door, and they confirmed that they didn't lock the door, but chalked it up to maybe it flipping over on its own. Itchy ears. A couple of days later, my friend, the one who originally lived in the house, came to visit and hang out, and the three of us were catching up on what's been going on and began telling her about what had happened. But before we could finish, she said, "The deadbolt was locked, wasn't it?" I was shocked, and she said it would happen all the time when she lived there, and that there was always some type of poltergeist activity going on, like the radio and TVs turning on. She even said that she saw a woman in a sun hat through the window sitting on the porch while she was laying on the couch. I asked why she never said anything, and she said that when she would tell her mom, she wouldn't believe her, said it was just her imagination. But I was relieved because, well, we confirmed her experiences. It's been years since I've moved, so I'm not sure if it's still active. My friend's family still lives there, but all the kids have moved out apart from the youngest one that I used to babysit. I'm no longer as close to them, but I do still talk to them when I visit my folks. My ghost stories, cemetery stories. Some things that need to be known to understand me this time. I had become fully invested in witchcraft. Both my brothers had joined the military, one Navy, the other National Guard. They made me swear to stay with my mom until one of them got back. My mom and I didn't and still don't have the best relationship. At this point, she was letting me do whatever I really wanted, which really wasn't much. I wasn't into alcohol or drugs, and ghosts were enough, thank you very much. During this time, my stepfather's mom passed away. I was very close to her. Turns on thing to make fan on computer quieter. Ghosts were enough, thank you very much. And during this time, my stepfather's mom passed away. I was very close to her. Her passing was the first time I had cried since my oldest brother, Carl's. And yes, it's pronounced Carlos. Oh, interesting. Left for the Navy. I slapped him across the face before he got in the plane for basic. Yeah, might have gotten him in trouble for that. But anyway, my friends and I are hanging out around the community college in town, and wouldn't you know it, we wound up right next to the graveyard where said grandmother was buried. Note, there aren't as many ghosts in cemeteries as one might think. Why would they want to hang out where they were buried when they can hang out where they were happiest? To some, that's school, or their homes, or their favorite dive bar, things like that. I'm not saying that there aren't ghosts in cemeteries, just not as many as you might think. The ghosts that haunt graveyards are mostly old caretakers and morticians and gravediggers. You won't find many other haunted graveyards, at least I think. Anyhow, we had arrived at this graveyard, and some of my idiot friends started telling ghost stories about said graveyard. You know, your ghost girl who gets dropped off the entrance, or some such nonsense. And while we were there, though, I did have an experience that I later learned was attached to the school, not the graveyard. But anyway, we're sitting outside the graveyard, which wasn't uncommon in Ontario. Teenagers would hang out wherever they could. And when I saw him, he was a farmer, or at least that's what he looked like to me. He was mumbling something under his breath and pacing back and forth. I stepped away from my friends, worried that this old man was lost and needed help. I didn't have a cell phone. My friends did, so if needed, we could have called someone. And upon walking up to him, I noticed that he was really thin. His clothes were hanging off of his body, and he looked like he'd been digging. I paused, concerned about getting too close. "Sir," I called, "are you all right?" He looked up at me then, and that was when I saw it. Half of his head was missing. It dawned on me then that he wasn't alive and that I had willingly walked up to a ghost. "Can you help me find it?" he asked. I tried to calm myself so I could try to help him. "Find what?" I asked. He lowered his head like he was trying to remember and then shook it. "I don't rightly remember," he said. I could tell by the vernacular that he wasn't a recent ghost. "Do you remember where you lost it?" I asked. surprising myself by continuing the conversation. He squinted at me. It wasn't a room in a house near the hospital. That's when I realized why he was out here by the school dormitories, not farther in town. You see, a few years before, an old nunnery had been moved from the hospital grounds to the property that the school owned. It had been a big deal at the time. And I remember that some of the sorority sisters had said that the place was haunted, and at the time I thought, well, duh, it's a nunnery. However, before the nunnery had been built, they had sort of lived in tents around the hospital grounds, tending to the wounds of locals who had gotten in bar fights or farming accidents and so on and so forth. This man had been one of those men. I sighed. "Did you get help from the nuns?" I asked. He nodded. "Well, that explains a lot," I said. "They moved the nunnery from the hospital grounds to the nursing school grounds," and his eyes widened. "They moved the whole house?" I nodded. "I'm guessing here, but did you perhaps die in the nunnery?" And here's the thing I wouldn't have normally pointed out to the man that he was dead, but he needed to know. Telling ghosts that they're dead isn't always a good idea. They can lash out at you, and I got lucky with this man. Thought about it for a second, then nodded, and he started to warp and change. It was like turning back time. His face and body filled out, and the side of his face came back together and got cleaner. He tilted his head at me. "You know, I've tried to figure out what happened for a long time." And he sighed. "Took a young lady like you to bring me back to rights." And he looked over my shoulder and stood at attention. I looked behind me to see Wyatt glaring at him. "Sir," he said, and acknowledged Wyatt. I shook my head. "Ignore him." I sighed. "He won't hurt you unless you come after me." He seemed a little bit too calm then. My apologies, ma'am," he said. "I don't think he likes me very much." I grinned, and I said he doesn't like anyone very much. I tried to shoo Wyatt away, but he refused to budge, and I turned my attention back to the man in front of me. "Can I ask what happened?" He lowered his head. "I don't think such a tale is meant for such tender ears, ma'am." I raised an eyebrow at him. "Firstly, please stop calling me ma'am." I pointed over my shoulder to Wyatt. He calls me that, and I hate it. Second, he's told me stories that wouldn't have been considered appropriate for mixed company, so anything you can tell me likely won't faze me. I smiled tenderly. "We can start with just your name if you like." "Name's Joshua." "Hey, Joshua," I said. "Idiot behind me's Wyatt, and my name's Leah." And by this point, my friend had started staring at me from the graveyard entrance. "How about this, Joshua? You come with me and Wyatt, and then when you're ready, and only when you're ready, you can tell us your story." He looked at Wyatt and nodded to me. "If that would be all right, ma'am." I sighed at the ma'am of it all, but grinned at him. "All right, come on then." And with that, I rejoined my friends, who asked me what the hell I'd been doing. I laughed it off as something weird that I did and said that we should head home as it was getting dark. Walked behind them and glared at Wyatt. "If he keeps calling me ma'am because of you," I said quietly so Joshua wouldn't hear me, "I'll find a way to send you wherever you're meant to go." Wyatt laughed. "But I like that he's afraid of me," he said, pretending to pout. "Well, yeah, he won't be for too long." Where logic falters. I've never believed in ghosts. Not as a child, not as an adult, and certainly not now. I'm the kind of person who builds their piece on physics and probability, who sees mystery and reaches first for evidence. If something can't be explained, well, I don't fear it. I take the whole thing apart, I've lived in houses with histories and even one rumored to be haunted. People swore they heard whispers or saw shadows. I slept like a stone. But there is one house, just one, that still sits like a knot in my memory. A place where reason keeps slipping through my fingers. It was nearly 10 years ago.
My ex-husband and I had rented a modest apartment tucked inside the tangle of Delhi's old spice market lanes. One bedroom, a tiny sitting room, and just enough space for the two of us and our 3-year-old son. All around us, life pressed in, a chorus of vendors and bells and clattering rickshaws. Yet inside, it felt dim. No matter how many bulbs we replaced, the bedroom stayed stubbornly half-lit. A gloom that wasn't dark but heavy. We shrugged it off until the neighbor knocked. She was an elderly widow whose doorway faced ours across the narrow lane. One morning she asked for her brass keychain back. When I told her I'd borrowed nothing, her lined face tightened. A young woman in a deep blue dress, she insisted, had stepped from our door to ask for it, and she was sure, absolutely sure. We hadn't been home and the door had been locked. I brushed it away as confusion or mischief. But the house wasn't finished. A few nights later, my cousin stayed over and our little boy slept at his grandparents' nearby. And early next morning, he bounded in to wake her until he froze on the threshold. He wouldn't uncover his eyes, he wouldn't speak. They carried him out trembling, and only after that they were streets away did he whisper, "There's a burned lady sitting in the corner." At the time, I didn't know, and my cousins kept it from me, afraid I'd panic. And meanwhile, my own son spent hours murmuring to the same corner behind the bedroom door. He'd offer his blanket and giggle softly as if something was listening, or someone. Children invent friends, I told myself. Imagination. And that word became sort of my anchor. Until the day we were packing to leave. A neighbor I barely knew stopped to chat while I waited for the movers. She asked where we were headed, and then added almost idly, "You wear blue so often, like the girl who used to live here. The one who died inside." Jesus. The girl, she said, had been set on fire by a jealous lover in a hotel. Rescued, but too late. She came home and didn't survive the night. And I checked quietly. I mean, the story was true. She was even the younger sister of a schoolmate I'd once known. And that is when logic loosened its grip, and I've spent nights alone in houses where death had walked before. No chills, no whispers. But this place, it wasn't haunted by a spirit. It was haunted by something denser. A residue of pain, an atmosphere that children and old eyes can still recognize when we, well, at least trained in reason, could not. The scientist in me still looked for answers. Carbon monoxide, well, maybe a subsonic sound or psychological imprints. None fit. No illness, no faulty wiring. Just a room that would not turn into an ordinary room. It didn't turn me into a believer, but it changed the shape of my doubt. Science, after all, isn't about being sure. It's about never stopping the questions. Maybe places remember, and maybe suffering leaves a kind of fingerprint. I'm glad I left that apartment, but it never really left me. Because some corners don't stay empty, no matter how long or how hard you shine the light on it. The Black Mist of Winterberg. where am I? Got it. I was 14. It's December of 2013. It's when my family joined my dad's coworkers for a ski holiday in Winterberg. We stayed in a sprawling wooden cabin perched at the edge of a pine forest. Its that's not even a word. Its red, tiled roof gleaming against the snow as a wide balcony overlooking the slopes. The place smelled of old wood and chimney smoke, aged but charming, like something from a storybook. And on the second day, I wiped out while snowboarding and sprained my wrist during the process. And by evening, I was done with everybody fussing over me, so I retreated into my room upstairs to lose myself in Mario Kart on my Nintendo DS. And outside it was already pitch black, though it was only about 6:30 p.m. The second floor was shaped like an L. At the end of the short side sat the staircase. Midway along it, a small bathroom, and my room opened right at the bend where the hallway turned long and narrow. My parents' room was at the far end, and from my bed with my feet aimed at the door, I could see the entire hallway bathed in the soft yellow light I always left on. Halfway through a race, something shifted. The light seemed to dim, just slightly, but enough to pull my eyes to the hallway. And there it was, an inky oval of mist, floating 10 centimeters above the wooden floorboards. It churned like a slow-boiling water. It remained partly transparent, and I could see, like still through the corner behind it in the hallway light glowing through. And at first I laughed nervously. Maybe I'd been staring at the screen too long. I turned on my night lamp. No difference. The shape held, and silent and still, but heavy with the presence that prickled the back of my neck. I rubbed my eyes hard, and when I looked again, the black fog waited exactly where it had been. I wanted to call out, but there was no sound coming out. My heart was hammering. I yanked the blanket over me and pressed deeper into the game. Anything to drown out the dread. And every few seconds I peeked, and the mist hovered, unchanging basically, for what felt like forever. 10, maybe 15 minutes later, until without a sound it was gone. I bolted downstairs in tears, begging my parents to leave. And we didn't, and I swapped rooms with one of the other kids and never saw it again. The rest of the trip passed like any ordinary holiday. Years later, at 24, I told the story to a girlfriend who loved all things paranormal, and her face turned serious. There are 3 kinds of apparitions, she said. White, benevolent, gray, neutral, and black, the ones that carry malice. They can disguise themselves, but what you saw chose not to. And her words froze me, and I pictured that dark oval again, and how it had simply watched, and her wrist had throbbed with pain. I was fully awake. The window had only cracked, no cooking smoke and no candles, nothing to explain it. Now, whenever I recall that night, I really wonder what the black mist wanted, or what might have happened if it had lingered a little longer. The knocks beneath the rafters. I'm 35 now. A man who thought he'd left behind the strange noises of his childhood. Yet here I am, 2 months back in my father's house. And the house, it seems to be having, well, some sort of situation where it's waiting for me. I won't bore you with every strange detail from the past 15 years, but what matters is this. When I left home, the disturbances stopped. Silence for more than a decade, and now I've returned and the quiet is cracked open. The house in the ground. My father built the place himself, really. 2 spiraling floors, nearly 350 square feet, gotta get European here, meters, not feet, way bigger, of creaking timber and echoing corners. And the house stands in the middle of a small town, on land that once belonged to a church from the 1950s. And that church wasn't ancient or grand, just a block of ugly concrete with a tiny morgue attached. They tore it down when my father bought the lot. During the construction, workers unearthed something stranger. A primitive Stone-Age grave, like no archaeologists, no ceremony, just a hasty removal and a pile of forgotten stones. My father was furious, but the foundation was already set. And sometimes I wonder if that buried silence is still down there pressing upward. The recent incidents began about 5 weeks ago. I was working at my desk when a sharp single crash rattled the wall above me. Bird or loose board, well, I just brushed it off, and days later came the footsteps. Light and deliberate on the wooden floor overhead. Told myself it was the house settling. One of my dogs sort of shifting in their sleep. But the sounds, they grew bolder. Then came the night I can't explain, around 2 a.m. I woke to a knock at my door, 4 or 5 crisp raps. They were quick and hollow. My dog erupted in panic and claws scrambling on the floor as if someone were standing right there. My heart was pounding. I opened the door, and the hallway was empty. My father was asleep on the other side of the house, and my dogs never barked at this knocks before. And 2 nights later, I'm cooking. That's when all of a sudden a heavy thud sounded directly overhead, and the kind that you'd hear if somebody were shoving heavy wardrobes around or something like that. There's no one upstairs, though. Didn't make any sense. 4 days ago, midday, another sequence. A loud knock followed by 3 or 4 fainter ones, like a rubber ball sort of losing its bounce. And this time, the sound came from, like, above, but inside the ceiling itself. I rushed to find my father reading in the kitchen. He had moved. And today, 2 hours ago, it was his turn. He came to me pale and puzzled and saying he'd just heard the same 4 or 5 knocks from above his head. And he described them exactly as I had. A house that watches. I'm not superstitious, and I don't believe in ghosts or signs of planets or anything like that. I lean on science always, and yet I can't shake the feeling of being watched. Headaches settle in behind my eyes, and I hesitate before stepping into a room, half expecting a figure waiting to be in the corner. My father admits he feels uneasy too, something he hasn't felt since I moved out years ago. Whatever's happening, I began this thing only when I came back. I don't know if the cause is in the wood or the soil or something older. But every night, the house seems to lean closer and listening, ready to knock again.
The Green-Eyed Sentinel. It happened a few years back, yet every detail still burns bright in my memory. Explaining it feels impossible, but I know it was real. I lived with my mother in a small house, just below my grandmother's. And that evening, I was heading out to meet a friend that had already called a ride. I climbed a narrow staircase and I waited at the hallway it's this one that sort of opens into the street, and I was leaning casually against the wall with my phone in my hand. My mother has always been quietly devout, not fanatical, just steadfast. She prays over the house and for her children, for every grandchild, a habit as natural as breathing. From where I stood, I heard her voice low and kind of commanding. It was curious. I edged closer to the stairwell to listen. And at first, she prayed for protection, which is pretty ordinary and comforting. But then, her voice changed and sharpened with authority, and she began rebuking something unseen, insisting that every trace of darkness leave her home. And that's when my dog was bounding up the stairs. Not frightened, not trembling, but urgent. She pressed against me, nudging me back, and her eyes were fierce, as if she knew something I didn't. I turned on my phone's flashlight. The beam caught nothing but the familiar walls. Yet when I flicked the light off, it appeared. A dark mass poured out of the house. Thick and heavy, but neither smoke nor shadow. It moved with impossible speed, and climbing the outside wall, it leapt onto my grandmother's roof. And there it formed a shape. A colossal, wolfish beast. Its body stretched along the ridge, bristling with coarse black hair, long and snout. It had upright ears. It was silent as a stone, and it stared at my grandmother's house. It could move. And then, a voice. It spoke in my right side, strong and close, as if somebody had stood beside me. Don't look at it. Focus on your phone. It wasn't my thought. It was a voice, real and commanding. My muscles locked until an unseen strength seemed to push my head downward. And even so, I risked a glance from the corner of my eye. And that's when the creature turned. Two brilliant green eyes met mine, unnatural and burning. And then with two single effortless bounds, it vanished into my grandmother's house. The world shifted in an instant. The air lightened and the tension dissolved. Silence returned, almost too normal. The whole encounter lasted less than a minute, yet it felt endless. And weeks later, my grandmother became too kind of complacent. She was saying that somebody came to her home in the early morning, and she seemed to swear that she saw a figure in her room. It was through every window that was barred and every door locked, and few believed her, it seemed. Until one night, she whispered to me that she saw a green eye, well, actually plural, meaning eyes. They glowed beneath the television, watching as she and my grandfather slept. And not long after, the grandfather's mind began to slip into dementia. He passed away within a year, and my grandmother now lives with advanced Alzheimer's, and her memories are now sort of like a shoreline after a storm. I still don't know what the thing was, but I know what I witnessed, and I know what I heard, and I know what beyond a doubt was something or someone that shielded me from that night. The night she returned,
My mom passed away in December 2019. She left us quietly in her sleep. Still had her hands holding her hands. The months that followed, well, they've been some of the hardest of my life, and I'm only 21. She was just 58 years old, way too young. I've been living with my boyfriend since late 2018. Until Mom passed, nothing strange ever happened in our place. And I've always been a practical person, not the type to believe in spirits or ghosts. I like to comfort, or at least have rational explanations for things. And lately it's getting harder to ignore what I've been feeling. The hallway where we sleep has become the center of everything unsettling. And that's also where a painting my mom made hangs. I put it up a few weeks after the funeral, and since then a series of strange events have made me question things I never thought I would question. The dreams. It began with dreams, sharp, vivid, and cruelly deceptive. Every time I dream of Mom, it starts the same way. She's alive again, standing right in front of me. I rush to hug her and cry in her arms and tell her how much I missed her. The warmth in those moments feels real, almost painfully so. But then something shifts. A cold understanding seeps in. She's not supposed to be here. And that's when her face begins to change. Sometimes it twists like wet clay being molded by invisible hands. Sometimes it hardens into something that isn't human. And every single time her expression turns furious, as if she knows I've figured out it's not really her. The dream collapses into a nightmare and I wake up gasping, too terrified to fall back asleep. The hallway door. One evening I'm telling my boyfriend about how overwhelmed I felt, even dared to speak of my mom in frustration. The hallway door creaked open on its own, and at first we laughed nervously and I shouted half joking, "Okay, Mom, enough." And then silence. The door froze mid-creak and the timing was too perfect. I know it could have been a coincidence, but the way the air shifted in that moment made my skin crawl. Then the internet cut. Another night I was alone. I was talking on Discord with a close friend, and he asked about my fears, about the idea that Mom's spirit might still be around me. The moment I admitted how scared that made me feel, the internet cut out completely. Our connection is usually flawless. No outages, no random drops, but right at that second, total blackout. A few minutes later, everything came back as if nothing happened. Rationally, yes, it could have been a fluke. Emotionally, it just didn't feel like one. The night that changed everything. A few nights ago, another dream. It began beautifully. Mom's arms around me and her smile, the smell of her perfume, and it felt too real. But again, that quiet moment shattered and I realized she wasn't supposed to be there. Her face was inches from mine when it started to shift, like soft wax melting, and I could feel my own breath catching. I woke up instantly. My heart was hammering. I lay in bed frozen, terrified to close my eyes again. And every time I almost drifted off, my body jolted me awake as if warning me not to let the dream return. When I finally slept, nearly morning, my boyfriend had already left for work, and then I felt it. Someone standing right next to me, not in the dream, but in the room. A heavy, undeniable presence. My body woke me before my eyes did, and when I sat up, the room was empty, but I swear something was there breathing down my neck. And this isn't the first time. A few months back, I once woke to see a gray, static figure hovering near my bed, and I brushed it off as sleep paralysis then, but now I'm not quite so sure. Living with the fear. I know these might sound like small, disconnected incidents to someone else, but my gut tells me something is wrong. And in that hallway, I constantly feel like I'm being watched. Even walking to the bathroom at night makes my heart race. My boyfriend, who doesn't believe in anything supernatural, has experienced nothing. He always offers logical explanations. Creaky wood, bad connection, or nightmares, and maybe he's right. Hard to stay calm when you're the one feeling it breathe down your neck. I don't know if it's really my mom or something pretending to be here. I guess I just know that it doesn't want me to see through it. I'm gonna go see a psychologist soon to deal with the nightmares, but no therapist can tell me what's walking through my hallway at night. Hopefully see you guys tomorrow. Well, hear from you from a distance through comments. Sweet dreams. See ya.
Greetings, believers in the extraordinary from Paranormal M. Prepare to question everything as you subscribe and enable notifications to keep up with our latest mind-bending stories. Enjoy the mystery. Story number 1, The Bro Fairies. The story may come across as silly or likely a very normal scenario, witnessed under the guise of a drunken young man. So I apologize ahead of time for the length and potential lacking payoff. I moved to California for the first time as a 19-year-old, and less than a few months later, I was 20 when celebrating one of my best friend from college's 21st birthday. We graduated around the same time, and got our first industry jobs in the same studio, so for a celebration all we did was share a bottle of Captain by a crappy apartment pool. We've never laughed more. By the way, I don't condone drinking heavily, nor carelessly, but I was a dumb kid. It was an unopened bottle, but the two of us started fading in and out of consciousness way too early on, like second shot early, and realized right away that something was up. Now, even though we recognized this, we were both pretty underexperienced with drinking and figured maybe our tolerance was just whack. I remember a handful of blips from before I made it safely back into my apartment. Mindlessly scrolling Tinder, my body just kind of feeling sick, and was going to my place and crash on the couch. Me explaining that I was going to go stay outside a bit longer, and finally what I refer to as the Bro Fairies. 3 young men, close to my age, in a way reminding me of myself, wearing matching garments of clothing in different colors, tank tops, shorts, and baseball caps. 1 green, 1 blue, and 1 pink. I can't at all recall their faces, but I do remember them helping me up off the ground after I must have blacked out by the pool and helping me up the stairs to my apartment door. They brought me the last of my liquor and said, "Thank you," in a sincere, albeit stumbling fashion. My college buddy was passed out on the couch, and I stumbled to the bedroom. The next morning I regaled him of the 3 helpful gentlemen, and he couldn't help but comment how bizarre their description was, and if I was sure I hadn't dreamed it, even though we both blacked out from the alcohol. I know they were very real, and did me a great service. I'm sorry if this is long-winded, but I've always thought back on how helpful they were. And I've since dubbed them my Bro Fairies. Brother sends a message. My oldest brother passed away 3 years ago to cancer. He left behind his wife and child. We were close, but not as much as I wished. We were pretty far apart in age. About a year or so after he died, I had a dream, and I think it was a visitation. In my dream, he called me on the phone. I picked up, and there was silence. I said hello, a bit louder, and I hear this voice, very soft, kind of shy and hesitant. He said my name and verified it was him. In my dream, I was aware this was not real because he was gone. However, I listened because I really wanted to speak to him. Both of my parents are gone, too. I asked him how he was. He said he felt great, better than ever. I asked how Mom and Dad were, and he said that they were busy chatting to their friends. He laughed and said my mom was very social. He suddenly got serious and asked me to help him. I said, of course. He said he's been trying to reach his wife, but she wasn't answering. Can you please tell her I've been calling? Can you please tell her that I'm always with her? I said, of course. He said he loved me and I woke up. I couldn't believe I remembered everything and how clear the message was. I called his wife and I told her my dream and what he had said, and she couldn't even speak. She cried and said, "Today's her anniversary." I was in shock. There's no way I could have possibly known that. A woman doing laundry. In the late 70s or early 80s, my mother, father, sister, and I stayed overnight with some family friends in Lexington, Massachusetts. Although their house was a modern split level built in the 60s, the town of Lexington is quite old by USA standards, having first been settled in 1641. The town has a lot of history, too. I woke in the middle of the night and had to use the bathroom. As I sleepily made my way there, I saw a woman in the corner of the room. Although the room was dark, the woman was clearly visible, as if illuminated by a light source. She was a young woman, maybe in her 20s or 30s. She was wearing a blue and white, I can't pronounce this word, Gingham, gingham? A white gingham dress with a matching kerchief on her head. She had dark hair, too. She was seated and leaning over a wash tub and was bending over scrubbing and washing clothing. She took no notice of me. Confused and bleary, I had no idea what was going on. The woman was about my mother's age and had the same slim build and brown hair. I said, "Mom?" The figure faded away and the room was dark. I went to the bathroom and went back to bed and fell pretty much back to sleep. I wasn't scared, but the incident stuck with me, as it was very vivid and unexpected. It kind of felt like it was a glimpse of something that had happened a couple hundred years before. Four paranormal encounters at my grandparents' house. The early days of my childhood I always spent going to my grandparents' house for the night every fortnight. The house is very large and spacious. It has an open staircase with no floor above it, so the main room on the top floor essentially has the center of it missing. 1990s. My mother lived there for most of her childhood as well. I never recalled seeing anything strange. Until one night, when she was sat in the living room by herself with the fire going. She may have been tired as she was laid on the sofa at night, but she recalled one thing: whispering. She never told me what she was being told. All she knew was that it was coming from the fire, and that the whistling was human or human-like. 2006. This next encounter was from my sister, when she was extremely young. She was at the main hall on the bottom floor of my parents' house with my grandma and grandmother. With my grandma and mother. My grandma and my mother were talking, which possibly would have been boring to a child her age, so she most likely started wandering around as they chatted. However, an extreme enigma was created, as when she entered the dining room, she saw two people sitting on the radiator, a man and a woman wearing modern clothing. My grandmother didn't know these people at all, and our family never knew anyone that these people could have been, so I dubbed them ghosts. 2018, my encounter. This was probably the most reliable and jaw-dropping of the stories. As I was getting ready for bed at my grandparents', I walked over to the bathroom and right next to my room to brush my teeth. As I stood at my doorway, I saw a man in a black suit with no face. He stared at me for enough seconds and seemed translucent, but I just knew it wasn't my imagination as he was there, and I tried to imagine him not being there, to which he stayed. After seconds, he disappeared, and I simply thought I was tired and my brain was tricking me. 1970s to 1990s. I never asked the date. The next morning, as I was curious, I asked my grandmother if she had seen any ghosts at the house, to which she responded that one night she came back from a bar early and went straight to bed with the door open. She then described to me seeing a man standing at the door with a black suit, a a blank face, and this time a top hat. The weird dreams that become reality. I'm 21, and since I was a kid, I always suffered from insomnia. And every time I sleep, I have terrible nightmares. Sometimes I dream with things that'll happen in the future with extreme precision. I used to write about the future in some notes, and when those things happen, I show my friends. They always get scared with the precision of the facts. But the point here isn't that. I'm here to share some of my nightmares with weird creatures, and sometimes they come to reality. I remember that I had a dream that I tried to fight a putrid creature that feeds on sadness and depression. That weird creature looks like an old putrid man with pure gray skin, sneaks into the house and attacks you while you're sleeping. This creature can hide anywhere. Doesn't matter the size of the place, somehow he fits there. 2 nights after I had this dream, I was alone with my girlfriend watching TV in my room. And then I looked at the window, and I saw this creature, but I wasn't dreaming. I just saw it. Thought that I was getting schizophrenic due to the lack of sleep. I was pretending that there was nothing there, until my girlfriend saw the same creature in the window and starts to scream. I was just telling her to calm down, and the creature suddenly disappeared, just like a smoke in the air. She told me about what she saw, and I had a note written about the creature, and I'm used to creating histories about my dreams and nightmares, and I create stories about the creatures I see. After that, she got terrified and started to read my little stories, and basically just got worse. I have more weird histories to tell about parallel dimensions and some totally vivid dreams, and the things just get weird. If you guys want to see more, tell me before I die. I've been suffering from insomnia and nightmares since I was 6 years old, and sometimes I see some weird stuff that I can't tell if they're real or not. Due to the lack of sleep and stress, I bet. I'm bleeding from my mouth every day, so I'm dying because of that, but I have a lot of histories to tell before it happens. Weird little creatures playing beside my bed. I've experienced a lot of paranormal activities in my life. And that one happened 15 years ago when I was 7. On the weekend, I used to visit my grandparents. They live in an old house not so far from where I lived that time. I remember that I've heard kids playing a game before I enter my grandparents' home, so I thought that were my cousins. When I got inside, I saw that none of my cousins were there. I got confused and asked my grandma if she had heard something. She said that it was probably my imagination. I felt okay and didn't ask anything more. Late at night, after watching some cartoons with my grandpa, I went to sleep, and when I entered my bedroom, I felt a different sensation, like I wasn't alone. But I wasn't the kind of kid to get scared easily, so I went to sleep. And then when I was sleeping, I woke up suddenly. I heard children's voices near me, and everything was so dark I just could see some silhouette of a little-sized person or whatever it was. They were about 40 centimeters, 1.3 feet tall, and they were running and laughing. I got scared that time, and I've closed my eyes and started to run to the direction of my grandparents' bedroom. I told them what happened, and of course, they didn't believe me. They said that was probably just a dream. I slept with them because I was that scared. On that night, I could hear them from the other room. They were really loud, and the next morning I told my mother about that. She believed me. She said that it happened to her too. When she was young, she said that there's some kind of fairy that lived with my grandparents, and that they're somehow trapped there. And also only kids could see them, by the way. She also said that when she was younger, she used to leave candies to them. So, they don't disturb you to sleep at night. And the other night, I did it, and I haven't heard anything anymore. experiences I've had since moving to the countryside. Next to my neighborhood, there's a campground just down the main road, and next to it is the foundation to an unfinished abandoned hospital that the town lost funding for its construction back in the 60s. Even further down the road, there's a small cemetery and a church. Services haven't been held in the church since at least the 90s, but the graves are in good condition. During the day, you can find a few rednecks drinking beer and stuff, but it's freaky at night. Not freaky in the sense of being spooky, more like something is truly offsetting about it, and the abandoned hospital is completely fine. A few months ago, my siblings and I went on a golf cart ride to the cemetery because we were bored and it was late at night. I kept getting this horrible feeling that something was very, very wrong. Like something, not a physical being, was screaming at us to leave. Then we noticed there was no sound of wildlife at all, which made them kind of uneasy, but I was freaking out. Then we heard whistling out of nowhere directly in our ears, almost like someone was directly whistling into them. No one goes to the cemetery at night, and this made them start panicking and made me almost pass out, and needless to say, we drove back home as fast as we could. We all fell asleep on the couch. Later that night, I had a horrible sleep paralysis episode, and I later came to find out that my mom, who knew nothing about the late night activities, also had a sleep paralysis episode that night. We never drove past that graveyard ever again, even during the day. Another one I have is one that I experienced with my two friends, Sam and Haley. We were going to visit another friend, Maddie. This happened around 3 years ago. She lived at the end of a long stretch of dirt road with about 2 to 3 houses on it, and Sam lived in town, just a ways off. The road was on the outskirts of town, not the same one I lived in, but was nearby. I wouldn't even consider it a town, since all it had was literally just a post office and a convenience store. The plan that we had going was that we were going to walk down that road, visit Maddie, and walk back to Sam's house and spend the night. Maddie lived with her abusive dad, and he would have never let us spend the night. It was already a stretch visiting her, but we decided to anyway. We hung out, and after a few hours, Maddie's dad told us to leave. So we did. It was extremely dark out, and we were already kind of put off. We started walking, and all of us slowly began to feel this ever-pervasive sense that something was watching us. Then we heard whispers mixed with the troubled breathing and footsteps. It sounded like something was dragging along the road, and there was multiples of them. We'd all fling our heads back, but there's nothing, and it'd stop for a while, but would come back even louder, almost to the point where it was literally right behind us. We began to feel this sense of pure, raw malice. I don't remember what the time was, but we felt as if we didn't get off that road within 5 minutes, something horrible was going to happen. So we all started running as fast as we could. The footsteps began to turn into sprinting and the breathing, and there was more of them. But we quickly made it back into town and walked to Sam's. The rest of the night at Sam's was uneventful. Another thing about that road is that it always felt off, even during the daytime. I had been to Maddie's house before then a couple of times and explored the woods around her house as well. The road always littered with dead animals, either skinned or had big gashes in the middle of them. There'd be a section of the forest that felt extremely off. We found 3 skinned rabbits laying in the middle of a clearing in the woods in a circle of the rocks. Haley, Sam, and I never went to Maddie's house again, but we still talked to each other, and Maddie moved about 5 months after that. I looked up the town that both of them lived in and still live in, and the first thing that popped up were numerous articles about the 2 girls being murdered by a man near the abandoned train tracks around the town. I don't know if the entities drove the man to do it, or if they were already attached to the town before it took place, or if the entities appeared afterwards. Creepy encounter. It's about 1:40 a.m., and I need to run to the bathroom, and as I pass the hallway, I glance at the door, and it's completely shut. I sit down, and from behind me I can hear my mom and my younger brother talking in the front garden. I can't make out what they're saying, being inside. I finish up and wipe. Didn't need to add that bit. But midway through, I hear the front door open. I finish and I flush. The door is still open, and I think it's a bit odd considering that we have cats and love shooting outside, so I peel around the doorway to see if someone has stood in the doorway. There isn't. I quickly walk outside, and I feel the very strong presence of someone walking around the side of the house. So I peel around, and again, no one. I get a bit scared and just kind of third back. As I was closing the door, I heard from the other side, clear as day, a scratchy voice. My mom's voice. In a way that I can only describe as being in pain without water for a week, parched, so dry. I lock the door in panic and walk into the living room where my mom, who I thought was outside, is fast asleep on the couch. I turn to my older brother and I explain what happens, and his face pales. He explains that my younger brother 20 minutes before had heard the same thing. He says that it came from the house and it sounded like a pained, exhausted voice calling to him. It's now 2 days later and I'm still trying to figure out what it could be. Dad's goodbye. My father died at the age of 72. I had just turned 30. My parents were in their mid-40s when I was born. No small feat for the late 60s. Dad was healthy and active and had the blood pressure and cholesterol of a 25-year-old. He was a World War II vet who enlisted in the Navy illegally at 16, retiring from service at 39 as a chief boatswain's mate. Never heard that term, chief boatswain's mate? One of those two, I hope. He only went to the 8th grade, though my mom helped him get his GED back in the 50s. But he was the wisest, smartest man I knew. He was killed in a freak car accident. He was leaving his home one summer morning in 1999. And he had to turn left onto the highway. Looking to the east towards the sunrise, the highway was several bumps and dips, which is probably why he didn't see the massive Ford F-350 bearing down on his 92 Chevy S10. The best we can figure, Dad spotted the Ford and gunned his engine to get across the highway, and the driver of the Ford tried to go in front of him, crossing the highway into the opposing lane. He ended up T-boning my dad's rig, at least 50 miles an hour directly on the driver's side door. His little truck was knocked close to 100 yards into a field. The tough old SOB had his aorta literally severed among other catastrophic injuries, but still managed to live another 6 hours before finally giving up the ghost after the surgery. My first words when my brother told me how he died were, "That's impossible. Superman can't die in a car wreck." But he did. See, Dad and I would typically talk about once a week. And after the death of my mother, he remarried and moved across the country to where he'd grown up, and I later moved to another state myself. It would typically be Sunday mornings, and we'd chat for 20 minutes or half an hour, whatever was going on in the world. Movies we'd seen, how his beloved Dodgers were doing, that sort of thing. However, the week before he died, he called me 3 different times, all at distinct odd hours. I was on the West Coast and he was on Eastern Time, meaning that there was a 3-hour time difference. Yet these calls from him came after 8 p.m. my time, well past the bedtime of a, big word, septuagenarian, active, healthy or not. In each call, he only spoke for a couple minutes, dispensing with the regular pleasantries to deliver the same message. "Son, I just want you to know I love you, I miss you, and I'm proud of you." That was it. The same message 3 times. I love you, I miss you, and I'm proud of you. He wasn't one of those men who was reticent about sharing his feelings, and he'd often told me and my brothers the same thing. But the timing and nature was so out of character. These talks, unlike our typical ones, lasted just a couple of minutes. And of course, there was the late hour of the calls. Monday afternoon, after these conversations, I was on my way home from work. I got a call on my primitive 1999 vintage cell phone from my girlfriend, later to be my wife, telling me as gently that she could that my father had passed. I cried the whole way home, and I was shocked, just shocked into the statement about Superman by my brother's call. Yet, as I look back, I can only smile. I don't know if Dad knew something or felt something or just randomly decided to call his youngest kid a bunch of times to share a message of fatherly love. But it stayed with me as one of his greatest gifts, and one that I try to pass on to my own daughters as much as I can now that they've grown up and moved on themselves. I love you, I miss you, and I'm proud of you. Story number 10. Someone's at the door. It was around 2009, and my sister was 15 and I was 9. Shut up, Gecko. My mom had dropped her off at a friend's house for a little get-together. While being there, they told me that they decided to invite some more people over. After doing that, they all piled into the bathroom to get ready together. They had shut the bathroom door so the cat wouldn't jump on their makeup on the counter. While in the bathroom, the doorknob had started to jiggle. They laughed it off as they thought someone had arrived early and was playing games with them. Now, my sister wasn't a believer in the paranormal until that night. They opened up the door and no one was there. They shrugged it off and shut the door again. Well, not even a minute after shutting the door, someone started to pound very aggressively on it. Completely freaked out, they locked the door and screamed, "Go away!" The pounding got louder and harder to the point that it was shaking the door. My sister said that her friend was convinced it was someone messing with them, so very swiftly she unlocked and swung open the door. No one was there. Completely freaked out, my sister had called my mom to pick her up. I went with, and when we arrived to get her, she ran into the car crying, telling our mom to get me out of here. She was completely freaked out and didn't say anything else the whole ride home. When we got home, I followed her to her room to ask what was wrong. And that's when she told me what had happened. Now, I didn't believe her at first. I mean, she's my older sister and she likes to play tricks on me. Seeing how freaked out she was, though, and how she never believed in ghosts until this changed my mind. A couple years ago, while driving into town to meet friends, every so often on a long stretch of highway that was semi-secluded, I occasionally would find random objects obstructing my path. Most of the time I could drive past it and didn't think much of it. The last time I saw something in the road, a huge log was blocking my truck from passing, so I stopped and got out of my truck to see if I could move it. Thankfully, another car coming from the other direction also stopped and got out and helped me move it. I talked to the guy for a minute and talked to him about the random shit showing up in the roads when we both heard something in the forest, and it spooked us both. It sounded like somebody trying to imitate a wolf or a wild dog howl, so we both got back into our vehicles and sped off. Thank God I wasn't alone, because not even a week later somebody I knew came across the same thing in the road. And when he stopped, he was all alone. And after he moved the log out of the road, a tall man in a ski mask was behind him, blocking his way back to the car. The man had a strobe light that blinded him. My friend said he couldn't see what happened next, but he flipped out and booked it down the road a bit till he got to a house and banged on the door to call the police. He left his phone in the car. Turns out, there's a psychopath who lives on this stretch of highway and terrorizes cars and attacks people who gets out. I even heard a story where he jumped on the hood of a young girl's car. The neighbors of this person told my buddy that they had to put up a bigger fence because he's setting their lawn on fire a couple times, and the police can't do anything about it because there hasn't been any proof of it leading to him. In short, I don't use that road anymore, and this story is a strong case for why I conceal carry now. Don't blame you. Ask Reddit. When I was 13, I had to go live with one of my older brothers because my dad had passed away and my mom had a nervous breakdown. My brother and his wife were renting a house, and it was sketchy from day one. They put me in a room farthest from theirs, and this room was always cold. Heat up on 90 and the register hot enough to burn you and you could exhale and see your breath. Things would just disappear for days and show up in a different spot later on. A couple of times my brother woke up to someone standing in the doorway to his bedroom. But when he would check to see if I was sleepwalking, I was asleep in bed. The door to the room I was in would just not open sometimes. There was always anxiety in the air and you could feel it wasn't right. Just weird feeling shit. Excuse the expletive. The wood paneling in my room had changing patterns. Never had a mosquito or a fly or any kind of insect ever in the room, and we're talking a house backed with a swampy bush. My brother got 2 German Shepherds from a friend of his. One was trained for personal protection, so pretty fearless, but still a good dog, friendly to people in the family and used to being in the house. But man, not this house. You couldn't get that dog to enter the house at all. This dog that could take down a full-grown man would whimper and cry like a puppy who didn't know what walking on a leash was. It was surreal, man. This dog was scared of nothing and was strong, real strong. One day we were sitting in the dining room having supper, and all 3 of us watched a loaf of bread that flew out of the bread box and whacked into the wall across the kitchen. Maybe 15 feet or so, flew straight, level, and fast. The next day, the young man who lived across the road decided to take his life with a rifle to the chest. I was done after that. I told my brother I was going to go somewhere else. I really didn't care where, just somewhere else. There was too much odd shit in that area of 3 to 4 houses. I've had other strange things happen when I was younger at my grandma's house, like doors opening by themselves and rocking chairs starting to rock back and forth by themselves. But my grandma always said that the dead won't hurt you. I really believed that. But living in the house was messed up. And I'm 51 now, and it's still the most messed up house I've ever been in. I'm not making this up. Everything is the God's honest truth. My TV was possessed. This occurred around 2008. My brothers and I were watching Scary Movie 4 up until late hours of the night on Comedy Central, until I eventually fell asleep. I woke up to a show where a man was sprinting through what appeared to be some sort of concrete shelter. I couldn't see most of his surroundings because it was pitch black dark. All I could see was where his flashlight was shining. I remember the man screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." He eventually found himself in a 4-way junction. Or maybe a larger room, it's hard to remember. I do remember shadows swiftly moving around the guy and eventually surrounding him. Then I heard something I'll never forget, a loud, high-pitched cackle. It felt like my TV went from a normal volume to its maximum volume immediately. In my bed, I tried to move or leave the room, but was completely paralyzed. I looked around and saw shadows darting across the lower half of the walls by the TV in the corner of the room. Fortunately, I was able to pull the sheets over my head as the cackling continued. After what felt like an eternity, I gained the courage to crawl out of the corner of the bed, hitting the ground. I then crawled to the door, where I saw my dad with a Bible in his hand. I immediately regained my strength and I was able to finally sprint out of the room into our kitchen. Crying, I told him that I thought my older brother was pranking me, which made my dad very angry. However, as he went into the room to turn in the light, I saw him pause. In my life, even now, 10 years later, I've never seen my dad frightened, except for this moment. He just stopped. Out of curiosity, I peeked from behind my dad and saw that the TV had the show Family Matters on, with the family hugging each other. It wasn't until years later that my dad told me his side of the story. He was reading the Bible in the middle of the night since he couldn't sleep. He heard a TV getting very loud, so he decided to turn it off. When he entered the room, he actually saw 2 cops in a cop car. One of the cops had no skin, just raw muscle. That cop had a giant grin on his face, turning over to smile at my dad until he saw the Bible in his hand. The cop seemed to immediately become terrified, and then the channel changed. Ask Reddit. I may have written about this in the past, but it's relevant here. I feel like I have a time traveler looking out for me. I've joked around that I became gay and he's my future husband trying to keep me from dying. Maybe he's like a low-stakes Terminator sent to protect me. I was a latchkey kid, and this would have been early mid-90s, home alone, made eggs, was watching cartoons. It's probably like 6 or 7 p.m. in the summer, so the sun's still out. Doorbell rings. I go open and it's a black man in running clothes. I only mention his race because there are very few black people where I live. He's younger, I'd say maybe mid-30s, and in shape. He's jogging in place and politely asking for a glass of water. Well, I'm like 7 or 8 years old and I invite this man into the house. No one else here. Show him to the kitchen, he grabs a glass, fills it up, guzzles it down. He pauses after drinking, holding the empty glass near his face. He smelled gas from the stove. I must have bumped one of the other burners or something when I made eggs because the stove was leaking gas. He turned the burner off and said the gas was on. He thanked me and left after that. Then another time when I was probably 14, before I could drive, I left my girlfriend's house. It was snowing heavy but calm. About halfway home, the wind really picked up and was basically blizzard conditions, but at no point did I feel like I was in danger. It looked worse than it was, and I was a few minutes from my house. I hear a car horn and there's a car next to me going slow. It's a black man. Again, these rare majestic people where I live. He has his window rolled down and he says, "Come on, I'll give you a ride home." I said, "No thanks, I'm good." He continued to drive slowly behind me, his eyes darting between me and the road. I didn't feel in danger, I didn't feel like he was pulling anything funny, but what struck me was how familiar he seemed, and the tone of his voice made me feel like he knew me. The only reason I declined was because I was trying to be a tough guy. Eventually he goes, "Okay, if you're sure you'll be okay." And I said, "Yeah, it's not that bad." He drove off. I got home okay, no frostbite. Something pulled me from my bed at night. This happened 15 years ago. I was a college student, lived with my now wife and our dog in one room together with other students in other rooms. My girlfriend had to work one evening and she was coming back around midnight. I've had school next day, so I went to sleep a bit earlier and I was in our room together with our dog. We slept. I was laying on my bed next to the wall, and on my right side was an empty bed place for my girlfriend. Suddenly I woke up. I didn't sleep anymore. I felt the presence of something else in the room. I felt something very dark. I was laying on my back, then opened my eyes, and something threw me from my bed on the floor. I did 180-grade flip, and I was on all fours on the ground. Then I saw in front of me on the floor a huge dark circle, and that something wanted me to fall inside into that dark circle. I didn't see that person, I only saw that dark circle, and I felt the power of something very strong that pulled me from my bed. I thought, this has to be a demon that wants me to fall into hell. I started to scream and cry very loudly, and in that moment came my girlfriend inside into the room. Everything was gone, but our dog started to bark exactly on the spot where the dark circle was. He barked about maybe a half an hour and was very excited. This is absolutely true, but was no dream, as I can remember everything and I was 100% awake at the time. I didn't do any drugs or alcohol. I've had no bruises and scratches, or rather I've had bruises and scratches on my body. There's no way that I could alone jump from my bed place, laying on my back over one empty bed, and on the end of this writing is brutal, and on all fours without help. Sorry, my English. Apology taken. This scared my ass off, and it's only 100% true. Maybe something wanted me to do sins in my life and fall into that hole, which meant hell for me. That was the scariest thing that ever happened. I became very religious after that. Saw my old high school friend. Turns out he passed last December. To give some backstory, this person and I had a few connections while he was still alive. We went to high school together, did a club together for a brief time. And then we did hook up at one point in my very early 20s. We're early 30s now. After that, we hadn't spoken or seen each other for around 10 years, although I'm learning that we both had several close connections in life and somehow always managed to just barely miss one another. Wasn't until my oldest daughter needed therapy last year that he re-entered my life. Not in any significant way, but it just shocked me because I sort of forgot he existed. I was unsure if it was actually him, but I just had that feeling in my bones that it was him. We would always pass one another, him on his way out and me on my way in, and awkwardly make eye contact without saying anything. The last time I remember seeing him was around February or March. I admit, it's been a few months since I've seen him, but color me shocked when I was scrolling through Facebook on Sunday and saw an old post on a friend's page that spoke about his death. My blood went cold. I couldn't believe it. I still can't believe it. Upon learning of his death, I quickly Googled his name and found out the details of his passing. He died late December, 5 days after his initial accident. So I went to his Facebook page and finally got the nerve to see where he worked. To confirm it was him that I'd been seeing all these months. After Googling the address, it was confirmed. It was him. Like I said, it's been months since I last saw him, but I don't know what to make of seeing him in the halls those few weeks after he passed. I've also come to learn that I saw him 30 minutes before he had a heart attack on the road and sadly never regained consciousness. I don't know all what he was doing that day, but I do know he was at work, heading somewhere, and I don't think it's much of a reach to assume I was probably one of the last few people to see him before his accident. Not sure what to make of it, but it's been racking my brain for days and my heart hurts for him. The loss of his future and his family. Ask Reddit. Was at my grandpa-in-law's cemetery. I had just gotten into my first huge ever fight with my husband. His grandpa became my father figure in the short time he was in my life. So I went to his grave and I talked to him and told him I was upset and why. I needed help. Our family tradition is to always clean it up, the whole thing. So we bring small plastic shopping bags or trash bags with us to put the trash in. Well, I'm alone, and I was headed towards a section that I sort of just bent over a soldier's grave, and I was cleaning it up, when I suddenly felt like I was being watched by something evil and negative. I stood up quickly and looked around. Mind you, where his cemetery is, it's nothing but cow fields on 3 out of 4 sides, so it's open. Well, one side has woods and goes to a person's property. Felt like whatever it was in those woods. There's nothing there, not even a squirrel. I went back to work on the soldier's grave. I suddenly hear the wind pick up and something run at me from the woods. I spun around quickly and literally felt somebody grabbing my shoulder and telling me everything was going to be okay. And like I was in some force field of a bubble and I was going to keep going, but the voice said, "I can't hold this much longer. You have to get out of here." I'm now running back to my car at this point. I get in my car, lock the doors, and turn on my Pandora, and it literally glitched down the playlist to turn on Blackpink's song, "See You Later." My grandpa-in-law never said goodbye, but always, "I'll see you later." Didn't matter if it was on the phone or in person. I sped home and told my husband. It's never happened again, and outside of one person and my husband, no one believes me that this happened. Never have had weird feelings like that again from the cemetery either. We still do clean it. We just cleaned it up back in October after my mother-in-law's funeral was over. Husband's family thought that we were weird. Others were saying that we were super nice. I woke up at 4 a.m. and felt like there was an evil presence in the house. To give some background last night, it was my birthday. My girlfriend and I went to her apartment after some drinks. She has one other roommate who was not there at the time. When we got there, everything was fine, felt like normal. We eventually fall asleep. Recently, I've been having horrible nightmares. Probably because I'm a little tea break from weed right now. Anyway, this dream I had a girlfriend, and she's not herself. She was rude, judgmental. We were also homeless. At a point in the dream, she grabs my hand almost as if she broke the fourth wall and says, "We are not alone, get out." I wake up very distraught. The first thing I notice is the sound of her roommate closing her door. My girlfriend was already awake and it was about 4:30 a.m. I ask her to check her roommate's location because they're close friends. She has access to that. So her roommate turned out to be there, and we brushed it off as just getting to work. So we're laying there in silence. It's when I start to notice things a bit odd. Everything was dead silent. The room itself somehow felt and looked different. The shadows and the lighting of the room were strange. Granted, I've never been up at 4:30. It was just different. And this is when I started to really freak out. Every alarm bell in my mind was going off telling me to go outside to get out. The room felt like it was closing in. To try and calm myself down, I ask my girlfriend if she's okay, and she says no. And she says something feels very wrong. I feel like I'm being watched. That statement alone put the fear in me I've never felt. I told her I feel the same way. I get out of bed trying to rationalize what's happening, and I'm thinking maybe it's just a nightmare and maybe she's just freaking out a bit and we're playing into a narrative because we have some anxiety. My mind was not letting me buy it. My mind saying, no, this is different. You need to leave right now. I go into the living room. The first thing I notice is that it's very hot, very hot. And it's not a shock that we live in a state where it gets very, very hot, but this time it felt like somebody left the oven on, like heat was generating in the room. Standing in the living room, it felt like I was being watched by someone or something much bigger and evil than me. I rushed back into her room and asked if we should stay at her mom's tonight. My girlfriend was more than happy to, as she was at the verge of crying and said that she wants us to leave right now. We get dressed, grab her cat, get in the car, and drive like hell was behind us. On the way there, we discussed what happened and came to the conclusion that something was definitely very wrong, and it wasn't just one of us. We both felt like we were in danger. I'm trying to rationalize what we felt last night. We're waiting on word back from the roommate to see if she felt anything. Listen, any advice would be appreciated, spiritual or scientific. I want to know what we went through. Did somehow my dream warn me, or did we just freak ourselves out? Whatever I felt last night, though, felt it like it was bigger than any of us. My piece of scientific advice is, please add more periods and commas and such. No offense, sorry. Weird situation, would like some opinions. Before I start, I'd like to mention that I don't suffer from any mental disorders that would cause hallucinations. Only borderline personality, which I'm a skeptic about myself. Anyways, I think my parents' house might be haunted. Let me explain. First odd thing I noticed was yesterday morning. As I was about to walk out of my room, I saw what looked like one of my parents' cats, clearly moving around in my laundry basket out of the corner of my eye. Now I figured maybe I accidentally locked it in with me when we went to bed last night. And as I look to turn to it, it fades away. Not outright disappearing like a hallucination would, but when I turn to look at it fully, it just kind of faded out of sight. Second thing was today when I was working out in my parents' garage, and I see what looks like a dark head peering and moving to my right, then ducking out from behind a pile of junk right in front of me. No corner of my eye crap. I thought maybe some asshole had gotten into my parents' garage and tried to steal my younger brother's motorcycle. So I dropped the weights immediately, and I'm in fighting form. Fight or flight response too, I suppose. I go around the pile and look everywhere, and a person could hide, and there's nothing, nobody. For now, that's everything. Now, I need to mention a few things. I'm currently living at my parents' waiting for the lazy John Howard Society to get back to me about living arrangements. I have a cross hanging around to the left side of my bedpost, and this is where I sleep, and I try not to do this at my parents', but because I've been here for over a month, I wasn't able to fully avoid M*** patient. And it just recently crossed my mind that maybe I shouldn't be doing that with the cross hanging from my bedpost. I don't know if maybe my mind is going on me or if there's some other explanation for these occurrences, but I'd like to hear what you guys think might be going on. Edit. I forgot to add that about a week ago, just before I was about to head to bed, I heard inaudible, most likely because I wasn't paying attention, because I didn't expect it, whispers in my left ear. My grandmother's house was haunted. For some background, my grandma, Yaya, and grandfather, Papu, must be Greek, bought a ranch home in the suburbs after moving from downtown Detroit in 1969. They were the second owners of the house, and it was built in the 1930s. My Papu passed away in 1981 in the home. My mother has 4 older siblings who had all moved out by that time. She stayed living with my Yaya until she married with my dad in 1986. Nothing weird ever happened that she can recall from her childhood. My grandparents were Greek immigrants. They were devoted and orthodox, and there were at least 5 crosses and icons in every single room of the house, so it always felt like I was in church when I was there. The first time I recall any odd goings-on was in the early 2000s. My Yaya was in her early 80s at the time, and told my mother and I one day, "Don't tell anyone, but at night before I go to bed, there's people in my bedroom that watch me." Immediately, my mom got concerned that this was a sign of dementia or Alzheimer's. Thankfully, it was not. We attributed it to her glaucoma. In hindsight, that makes no sense. Or that she was in a dreamlike state but not yet asleep. Didn't hear much about anything odd after that. In 2012, my parents separated and my 3 siblings and mother moved in with my Yaya. My sister and I had our own rooms on the first floor, and my mother and brother stayed in the basement. Odd things started to happen. The motion sensor light at the bottom of the basement steps used to go on and off by itself in the middle of the night, according to my brother. The hallway linen closet would be open in the morning, even though it was shut previously. Some banging in my Yaya's closet. All a bit weird, but nothing too crazy. One night I had a few friends over, and we were drinking in the basement when my mom was out and my brother was over at my dad's. All of a sudden we heard a loud crash from a downstairs closet, and when we opened it, the metal pole, which had 3 light jackets hanging on it, was split down the middle. It was odd because there was nothing in the closet itself that would have fallen to make that sort of banging sound. I let it go and I didn't think of it. In March of 2015, my Yaya sadly passed away at the age of 95. She passed in her bedroom. We knew she was going to go soon, and before we went to bed, my siblings, mom, and I prayed over her. At about 2 a.m., I woke up out of sleep and to somebody saying, "Get up." And when I went into her room, she was gone. Maybe it was a dream. I don't know, but I was thinking about it just freaks me out. After her death, things went haywire. One night, my sister and I were watching television in the living room. It was probably 10:30 p.m. I went to the kitchen to get something to eat. The light from the TV was bright enough that I could easily find my way back to the kitchen. I looked at the back door because I felt odd. That's really the only way I could describe it. The back door had a peephole, and the light in the backyard was automatically set to turn off at 11 p.m. Normally you could see the light shining through the peephole, but I didn't. As I adjusted my eyes, I saw a large black shadow standing at the landing in front of the back door. I froze and turned my head and closed my eyes. When I opened them again, it was gone. Needless to say, after that, I felt extremely uncomfortable in the home. Prior to this, I never had any real paranormal experience. I was on the phone with my mom and simultaneously pulling into the driveway of the house. We were finishing up our conversation when I looked at the front door. It was the kind of screen door that had a white bottom and then a window that would begin about waist height of a 6-foot adult male. What I saw was my mom kneeling in front of the door, so I only saw her eyes and her curly black hair peeking over the bottom of the window. As I was still on the phone with her, I said, "Mom, what are you doing? Stand up." And she told me that she wasn't home and would be there in a few minutes. Again, I froze, shut my eyes, and when I opened them, the eyes and curly black hair were gone. I told her I wasn't going to the house until she came home, and she didn't even ask why. When she pulled in, I told her what I saw, and she said, "Honey, I was hoping none of you would see her." She went on to explain that since Yaya passed, a small girl with black curly hair and a red dress would often appear in her bedroom downstairs. She gave one specific example. She was watching TV on her laptop late at night, looked up and saw her standing in the middle of the room with a big smile on her face. All my mom said was, "Hello," looked back at the TV, and then she was gone. I guess this was their typical interaction. Things like the cellar door would open. I would latch it, come back down to retrieve my laundry, and it would be open again. The banging on the closet doors got worse. The microwave door and oven drawer would be left open. If we called my mom's phone, it would often sound like static gurgling if she was in the house. The worst of it happened one night, about 2 weeks before we were to move out of the house. We sold it roughly 5 months after my Yaya died. My siblings, mother, and I were sitting in the dining room laughing and having a couple of drinks. Without saying a word to each other, we all went silent. The air in the room got heavy and it felt like the oxygen was sucked out of it. All of a sudden, we heard an ungodly wailing from the basement. The only way I can describe it is a mountain lion yelling. This was accompanied by stomping up and down the stairs. I hid under the table with my ears covered, my sister sat still, and my little brother cried. And my mom, the absolute badass she is, runs down the stairs and screamed, "In the name of Jesus Christ, get the f*** out of my house." We were all absolutely terrified. Beyond terrified. That night we all slept in my room together. My mom, my brother, slept in the living room until we moved out. Nothing too crazy happened after that night in the 2 remaining weeks that we lived there. It's been 8 years since, and we occasionally talk about it. My mom's siblings don't believe it because they never had any strange goings-on in the time that they lived there. I sometimes wonder if the new residents have had anything happen. They haven't sold the house yet, at least. Since then, my family has not experienced any type of paranormal goings-on, but god damn, I do not want to live in a haunted house again. Don't blame you. My ghost is an asshole. My house is haunted, or has some kind of spirit attached to it. I even saw it one day. It was between my house and the old church next door. Thing is, I was walking between them and it walked strangely and it was very hunched. As I got to the end of my yard, it looked up at me, and this thing had 0 facial features. I was not impressed. Just saw it the once, though. Here's our activity. Sitting in my room with the Roku remotes on the chair beside me. My TV started switching between apps on the Roku and was even picking them from the home screen. It was weird as fuck. My little sister and I were hanging out in the basement because that's where her room is. And there was a cup sitting on the table, and as I'm sitting on the chair, I sort of talk to her and it flies across the room like somebody threw it. We were both silent for a couple of minutes, and then she told me she finally believed me that there maybe was a haunting. Fast forward to this morning. I'm sitting in my chair by the window smoking a cig. My dog is laying on my bed, sleeping per usual. I don't have a dresser. I have a shelving unit I put folded clothes on. As I'm smoking my cigarette, admiring the beauty outside her house, I hear a loud crash. I look over and my entire shelving unit had fallen to the ground, as if somebody had pushed it. Yes, it was put together properly and has been holding up well since I purchased it 5 years ago. At first I didn't mind the ghost. It played a few other tricks like hiding things from us and sounding like children are playing and nobody's home, calling our names when no one else is around or awake, and stuff like changing channels or throwing cups. It clearly wants to make itself known. I think I'll use the law of dominion, so if it's bad, it can go away. If it isn't, I guess it can enjoy fucking up my house in the afterlife. ETA, my niece just told me a few days ago that she made a PB&J and left it on a plate in the stove while she did something else. She came back and the plate was on the floor. Nobody had been in the kitchen. She was here with me at home, and I just hide in my room.